That's up, just hand over.
Mm-hmm. Welcome, everyone, to the Ancestral Healing Center Cafe Chat. I'm Bernadette Thompson, and I'm here with my colleague, Michael Hallett. Rochelle is away today, so Michael and I are holding down the fort. And we've been talking about trauma-informed genealogy for the past few weeks, looking at it from all different directions. So today, Michael and I wanted to talk about what happens when you're looking back at your genealogy, your family story, and you stumble on some things that just don't make sense. You literally may think, that can't be right. You know, we want our story to match what we've been told or what we've created in our heads about who we are, like what our identity is. And when we find things that don't make sense, it can leave us not only with questions, but also with the uncomfortableness in our bodies. Like feels like something's off. So Ancestry.com had a commercial out a while ago that highlighted someone who thought their heritage was German. And then they found out they were Scottish. So, I mean, that's a huge, if I'm thinking I'm German and then I'm Scottish, I mean, they're very different cultures. And so that would have been a pretty dramatic change for me. I'm all Irish. So if somebody had said, oh, you're not Irish, you're German, I would have been pretty shocked. But, as we look closer to our families, when we look at the relations between, our ancestors, the generations back, it can be much more complicated. So Michael, over the last month or so, has done some research in his own family and recently found some things that are kind of complicated about his own identity and just how he felt as he uncovered these. So, Michael, I'm going to pass this over to you. And just as the noise starts.
Thanks, Bernadette. So Bernadette's got a bit of construction going on next door to her. So it's not like a game show buzzer saying it's time to hand over. That is just a little bit of extra noise going on. But yes, I've been working through a situation in my family where when I first did all of my research, it was quite some time ago, it was about 15 or so years ago at that time. And at that time, some of the British census records hadn't been released. So I got so far with the research, and then I kind of left it because I ran out of information. But recently I became aware that there was something going on around my great-grandfather. Now, I knew he'd been involved in a trial, and it was quite a high-profile trial I discovered in the last few weeks. And I thought that I'd kind of done with that thing, and I just became aware. He just started surfacing, just being aware that there was what felt like some shame around him or his situation. And that was being, as Bernadette talked about sensitivity and being quite sensitive. I was picking up on that shame, and that was I was finding it, being aware of that whenever I was trying to present myself in public. There's this awareness of something's not right, and this is how the genealogical how trauma can affect us when we are quite sensitive. And so I hadn't really looked at his generation, and over the course of about the last month, there was just this unfolding string of discoveries that were completely unknown in the family. And it's quite, it's quite disconcerting to discover that the situation, what actually happened, is very different to what you've been. Well, you grow up. Sometimes you grow up with a story, as Bernadette said, and sometimes you grow up without a story.
Yeah, Michael, I was going to ask, what made you go back and start doing this again, because we've known each other for a while and this is a new dive into it.
Yeah, this is a new dive. I mean, I haven't been subscribed to a genealogy service for over a decade, and I was back in there resubscribing to all of these things and saying, well, I need to look at this. As I say, it was just the sense that there was some unfinished business at that level. And it's very interesting because one of the tools that we use is a system called family constellations. And family constellations has got three rules, or what are called orders of love. And the first order of love is that everybody in the family has an equal right to belong in it, regardless of who they are, what they did, or of their fate or their actions or anything. And the reality is that historically we've pushed away the people who didn't meet our what perceived social standards, or people have quarantined themselves. They've withdrawn and said, I'm not good enough. And the second order of love is that where you've got all of these people who've been marginalized and these situations that were never handled when they happened, those situations end up repeating in later generations. And the third order of love is that the older generations have precedence over the more recent ones. Named, the further back they are, the deeper the impact of them. And this is what I encountered, was that I dealt with all of these things from my parents and my grandparents' generations, but there was this even bigger thing up at the great grandparent level. I don't know if you've experienced any of that, Bernadette.
Yes, I mean, that's where, sometimes that's where the secrets are. It's the things that haven't been passed down, the things that haven't been told. And yes, it's been powerful for me at the great grandparent level.
Yeah, so the first thing I started looking at was the trial. And I knew he was involved, he was working for a chain of pubs in South London. I think he was managing one pub in a chain or something like this. And there was some tax fraud going on. And I found that the investigation actually went on for nearly a decade. So that must have been incredibly stressful. And finally, it went to trial in 1922. And the amount of the fraud was £46,000, which is a lot of money in 1922. And I used one of these inflation calculator things, and that actually comes out at £2.3 million today. So this was a significant sum of money. And I found that there were clippings in newspapers all over the British Isles pretty much every day of the trial. So this thing was being very widely reported. It was held at the Old Bailey, which is like the High Court, the ground zero of the British legal system is the Old Bailey. So this was a really big deal. And at the end of the trial, there were 7 defendants, 5 of which were found guilty, including my great-grandfather. Of the 5 who were guilty, he was the one who received the shortest sentence. So he was sentenced to 6 months in prison, which suggests that he was more of an accomplice rather than a ringleader. You know, the ringleaders were actually sentenced to hard labor. They still did hard labor back then, and he wasn't sentenced to that. So that was the first discovery, and then I started looking deeper into the family around that time, and I discovered that his wife had left the family at some point, abandoning 5 children. So, and that pattern repeated in my grandmother's generation. She left the family, abandoning my mother. So there was already another pattern there. And then I discovered there was a child that died young. And then I discovered that there was in the census that my great-grandfather had remarried. But I couldn't actually find a certificate for the marriage. And the married name was actually put down slightly incorrectly from the birth certificate of his wife, new or second wife. And this is, so it's whether this marriage was actually legal or not, don't know. So I found all of that, and it was like, okay, so I started to get some detail on this. And then I ordered a death certificate for my, I noticed that my great-grandfather died about 2 years after he came out of prison. So I thought that he at age 54, which is quite young to die. And so I thought, well, what did he die from? And so this certificate arrived and showed that he died of a heart attack. And I went to put the certificate into my filing system where I had all of these documents in date order. And the date of his death was the 12th of April, 1925. And I opened up my filing system, and there I actually had a very small card, which was from a cemetery in South London, with a notification of a burial and a grave number. And that was dated the 16th of April, except that it wasn't him. And it was actually his son, his eldest surviving son, who was 26, had died. And so I got a certificate for the son, and I found out he died one day after his father from pneumonia. And it looks like this son contracted pneumonia, and I think my great-grandfather had just been through so much that I think his health had suffered in prison, and he had this heart attack and died, and the son died the next day. And it literally just, there was no family left. Within 2 months of that, one of his remaining sons emigrated to New Zealand. Another one went later. And it was like in terms of family constellation, the constellation blew up. There was no center left to it. And it was just these scattered people trying to deal with the remains of it.
Michael, I have a question. Did you know the initial story, which you had told us before, about the tax fraud? How did you find that initially? Like, when you went looking deeper, you did know that story.
I did know that, yeah. So at one point, and again, yeah, and this is something that's happened several times to me, and I don't know about you, Bernadette, but people have popped up out of nowhere and contacted me.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened about a year ago. There a relative of my mother's from this family emailed me, found me on Ancestry with one of you have an ancestor in common thing. And they sent me an email based through on that and said, I'm your, my great uncle's granddaughter or wherever she was, some in the tree somewhere. And I had very little information. I had some information from a family tree that my mother had drawn up, which has proven to be almost entirely incorrect. Because it's got so many errors in it. And so I started corresponding with this lady, and she started sending me, she gave me a sort of a basic structure of that family. And so I put that in, I put the names in, but I didn't really, I just keyed them in at the time. It's interesting that sometimes it almost feels like the record is under lock and key and you're not allowed to look at it at this time. I don't know if you've had a sense of that timeliness.
Yeah, there is, absolutely. And it's often in the journey when I was researching my family, I would put it away for a while. I'd just leave it, because you could feel that there was more there, but you couldn't reach it.
There's almost a deflection that takes place. And you don't, now I notice it, I'm aware of it, but back then I didn't.
Yeah.
I just found myself sliding away and leaving it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there was actually the single biggest piece in the whole family thing was there, and yet it was not accessible at this time.
What's so important is that, one, this is such a big story. And, when you look at it and, how the idea that this was something that was recorded over, there were people that was in the paper every day about what had happened. And it really can change. It's a huge change to what you thought, even with, and Michael, you had talked about your grandmother and how she was not, she was the black sheep of the family and pushed out. And you thought that was the big story.
I thought that was the big story.
Yeah. And so people listening, as this is the type of work that Michael and I have done, is that when you hold the story, when you feel that there's more, we have to recognize that these are human lives, like the human life that we're living, and it's very complicated. And when you step back and even just look at your own life and all of the changes, and all the things that people might not know about you, that could change the way they think about you, it's all in that identity. But so this must have been huge.
Yeah. So I got all of this information, but it didn't. I just kind of record. By that time, I knew about my grandmother and I thought I knew the story. So when this information came in, I processed it as if it was just names and I processed it as standard genealogy. I hadn't, at that time, I hadn't consciously gravitated into trauma-informed genealogy. So I didn't notice, for instance, that some of the dates, for instance, I didn't notice that, one of the children died young. It's like, okay, that used to happen. So I was processing it mentally, but not emotionally. And eventually, about 5 years after I first corresponded with her, she sent me a mail saying, I found this thing about the tax fraud trial. And that actually brought up some financial trauma for me around doing taxes. And again, I processed through that. And then I thought, okay, I'm done with that. So I kept having this thing of I'm done with it. And in fact, the biggest thing was still waiting out there. And it took, say, quite some time before it finally surfaced, like an iceberg, that you think you're just looking at the smallest part of it and going, yeah, that's all right. Like, I've got a handle on that. And then suddenly it's like, oh, and suddenly you realize that you don't know anything. I had to completely start from scratch with redrawing the family tree from that line, because I didn't know what was accurate and what wasn't. And in the family tree that my mother has drawn, she had no grandmother listed for herself. No grandmother. And she had a name for her grandfather, which was my great-grandfather who got cancelled, and it wasn't that name. And it was actually the name of the son who died in 1925 at the same time as the father.
Well, there's so much in this story. My question is, chomping at the bit that, and then you went to this other part of it. It's like, my first thing was, because you've told us this story before. So I remember when you said that his sons had gone to New Zealand, this was that and I remember thinking, tax fraud, it's definitely a serious thing, but it seemed like a lot of shame that he was carrying for what could have been, something that, all right, he ended up getting it, he got in trouble. And but discovering now that this was a well publicized, it took your family through the mud, so to speak. And I can't imagine what they felt. And then the whole thing that your mom didn't know any of this. It was such a mess. It was kind of like thrown in the closet and the door was shut.
Yeah. So I don't know, because by the time my mother was born, I think so her grandmother was gone from the scene. And the trial happened a year before she was actually conceived at the time of the trial, at the time of the most intense crisis in the family, and that was when she was. So we know from epigenetics that is like the worst possible time that you can to be impacted by the family trauma is at conception. So we know that. And then she obviously knew something about the son who died. And she had this card, this little card, and how that survived and came down to me is like miracle and mystery. The whole thing is bizarre. But this is how the record works. It's literally like this thing that has a life of its own. You think it's a set of very finite points of data, and you go and you find these finite points of data, and it absolutely isn't. So, for instance, when I found out that the son had died, I went to search the burial records, and it came up and said, we've got no record of him. And then, so just just that instinct, the trauma-informed genealogy instinct, I did a search on his first name, Eric, rather than his surname, and it came up. And in the records on the database, his surname was misspelled. It's like the smoke and the mirrors just keeps going. And then right, this is the guy. So I ordered a copy of the burial record, and the website failed. And it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't make it up, but it is, what I love is that you are telling this whole story. So for anybody listening, you've heard us talk about, I've talked about some things I've found, Rochelle has, Michael has, but Michael telling this whole story gives you the understanding of how this trauma that is back there can come forward. We talk about epigenetics, and some may be thinking here like, well, but this was so far back. Why does it matter? Why was Michael, affected by it? And what could you talk a little bit about the sensitivity of finding?
So the reason why it matters is if you're sensitive enough to it, you'll be aware, possibly subconsciously or even unconsciously, that somewhere down in the depths of your being, where there should be a sense of identity, there isn't one. And it's like there's just this empty null place. And the more sensitive you are, the more you're aware that you're trying to construct a life, and particularly present it to the outside world without having a clear foundation of who you are. So all of this stuff is not about filling in some names on a family tree or even finding out all of this stuff happened. It's actually about an identity rewrite. It's about having a solid, clear, known, truthful story of the family.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And it's so true. What most people don't understand is how they come to know themselves and who they are. They don't realize the layers. It is, for me, and we've talked about it before, I was one of 8 children, actually 8 surviving. There had been 10. And I was the 6th of the 8. So right there, before I even step outside the house, my identity is steeped in, I'm one of the little ones, and I'm one of the ones that doesn't matter as much. I'm not as important. And so we forget that all of this emotion is tied up in who we are, in our identity. I have shared, my maiden name, Bernadette Margaret Teresa O'Brien. So, for me, that was my identity. And if I shared that name, people knew who I was. And it has taken me now, I try not to use that anymore, because I have a deeper understanding with all the work that I've done, with all the trauma-informed work that we have done, to understand the depth of who I am and how that story became my story, and how it's not, my name is not just my story, and that there are layers and layers. And this journey is so important.
And the journey is fascinating. I'd really say to anybody who's doing this journey and wanting to look from through a trauma-informed lens, is that you have to approach the record very subtly, because there are clues in there that may or may not look like anything at the time. So for instance, when I started looking at my great-grandfather's record, I found in the, I think it was the 1901 census, his occupation was listed as a tea merchant, and then over the top of that had been written grocer. And it's very tempting to think, what does that matter? And then we come forward 10 years to the 1911 census. And I find that his wife is now on a separate record at a different address. Okay. And in the 1911 census, they had columns for how many years married, how many children living. So on my great-grandmother's record, it said that she was a visitor at this address on the night of the census, and she was married, and she had 6 children, of which 5 were living. And then we look at my great-grandfather's record, and it says he's married, and it says he's got same number of years and 6 children, 5 living, except the number of years married, the number of children living have all been crossed out. So that's 2 consecutive census records where somebody's written something down and then crossed it out. And was that just whatever, not thinking straight?
Mhm.
Or is there a pattern here? Is there something hiding? And then I look further, and then I find that the place where the 2 addresses are 50 miles apart. So 1911, that's quite a long way to visit.
Yeah.
It's not impossible, but it's a long way to visit.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And then in the next census, there's a new woman claiming to be his wife, for which I can find no marriage record. But I actually find that her first name on her birth certificate is different from the name she's using on the census.
So I have a question. It just popped in. And just to clarify, who was the parent that was living with all of the children? Like
the father, my great grandfather.
And how old was how old were the children, or approximately? You might not know this exactly.
Well, there was say 6 of them, 5 living, so it was quite a span of time.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the first census, there's the 3 youngest ones are there.
Okay.
Sorry, the 3 oldest children are there.
Okay.
And then one of those dies, and then the next census, there's those 2 plus there's 3 others that are very young. And then in the third census, and then in the third census, the 2 older ones have left home, and there's the 3 youngest are there.
Yeah.
As teenagers.
It's, Michael has done this research over years. We've talked about that, so I don't want anybody to feel like, oh my gosh, I can't do that amount of research. We can't go in, that's too much detail. But I want you to think about, when you begin, and when Michael began the journey, as saying for myself, you get the pieces you need first. It is kind of like it begins to open up for you. I hate to use the word as a flower, because a flower is so pretty, and sometimes this isn't very pretty, but you begin to get the information that makes the most sense at the time. And then you feel, and I know I did, and maybe Michael feels the same way, but I would reach a point that I'm like, okay, I know that. That's good. That's almost like you're saying that's enough. Yeah. And then you leave it, and then all of a sudden you're like, that's not enough. I know there's more. There's this. And so I just want people to know that this isn't like you have to, you can begin to understand your story and begin to heal and feel like you're beginning to truly identify who you are as a person, without having this intensive detail that Michael's is sharing with us now. And it's important, as part of Michael's story, this is filling in things that he didn't know a month ago. So, that's what's pretty incredible about this.
Yeah. But very often it's the records that don't make sense that are actually the keys
Mm-hmm.
finding out the story, because the stuff that nobody was bothered about, the record is out there and it's plain and clear, and everybody's in the census correctly, and the birth certificates match the census names, and all of the stuff when everything is sort of going along nicely. And it's when things aren't going so well, and that's when you see these disturbances. And as I say, this is a multi-layered
Mm-hmm.
process, and you construct a story out of what you've looked so far, and then you go, this stuff doesn't make sense, and you have these, whoa. I say, when I saw that these two people had died within a day of each other, it was like it was there was a big jolt. But certainly this story is huge, and my first response was anger. I was really, really angry. And I'm sure it was my mother's anger, or anger on behalf of my mother, that she'd grown up never knowing the truth of her own story. And I can see now that she lacked that sense of identity. I can see it in so much of who she was, that there was no real strong foundation there.
Yeah.
Because that had been denied to her.
And, that's really important, because we talk about resilience, and we talk about, with the trauma that people go through. And when the story's not shared, the trauma isn't shared, so you don't know. And the other part of it is the resilience isn't shared. And whatever, for me, listening to your story, I have this feeling of I don't even know what the right word is, but this feeling about your great grandfather, that he may have got caught up in something that was beyond what he was able to handle. And the fact that when you look at that census and you see him with the children and the mother is gone, I mean, that is, even in today's world, when the father is raising the children and the mom is the one, it seems so like, what do you mean? It's supposed to be the other way around. The mom stays and the dad goes, and that's where things can be very confusing.
And in his, so to me, it looks like, and again, this may be a story that I've made up to make sense of the data points that I've found, but it looks like, first of all, from my great-grandfather's death record, it said that he had chronic bronchitis, so he wasn't in good health. And then his eldest surviving son got acute pneumonia, and it almost looks like that was enough to trigger a heart attack. And but in that, I see his humanity. I see that he cares enough about his son, that this has affected him so deeply that it's actually killed him.
And he cared enough. I mean, he stayed with those children.
Yeah. So you get these two sides of the stories. You get the full balance of a human being who made a big mistake,
right?
But at the same time, he hung in there for his family, and in the end, it didn't work. But he did as best he could. And so he's really humanized by that, and that gives you a sense, again, the resilience, but also there's a sense of completion. I can put that down now.
Yeah, but the humanizing we are a part of them, or they are a part of us. We are, this is not, there are a lot of people, most people who are listening are going to be people who have this idea that, okay, I want to know this knowledge, I'm interested. But it truly is genetically, emotionally, it's passed down all through our genes, but also just in the history, in the knowing, it's incredibly important. And just listening to your hearing the whole story is so. I feel better hearing the whole story, which is kind of. So, how does it make you feel in your identity now? Has it changed anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Just literally in the last week, there's a sense of that, some of that kind of numbed out sort of null place. If I really go and feel in deep, I could experience it before, and now I can feel it. It's like there's a fullness there, and it's content and it's confident.
Mm-hmm.
And we look in the world today, and particularly with younger generations, we see more and more people who have this sense of lostness and anxiety. And I'm in no doubt that some of it is going to be down to the fact of not having a clear sense of identity. And again, we don't really understand that.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't gone far enough with the links between generational trauma and trauma-informed genealogy to understand that identity is informed by actually knowing the genetic knowing. It's not the mental knowing, it's the genetic knowing of who we are and where our families come from.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not sensitive enough to feel it, then we just sail along and we go, yeah, I'm fine, that doesn't bother me. And if you're one of the sensitive ones, there's just this thing that you can't put your finger on.
They're buzzing again next door. I think what's important is if we look at families today, that they are going through the same things as families generations ago, and that and this connection can be comforting in the way that we understand how complicated life is, and that looking back, and this is where the resilience comes in, looking back, people make mistakes, and like your great grandfather, and yet there was goodness to him, and I think we just for people who are looking at themselves in this life and trying to find answers.
Yeah, absolutely, Bernadette. It's just picking up. This is sort of like tag wrestling, where you have to you get the tap and you're in the ring whether you're ready or not. But it is once you move beyond just the basics of dates and names and places, there's a very, very profound and very meaningful world that you enter into. And the analogy I often make is it's a farmer's field, and the field has been tilled by the past generations, and they've made it look as good as possible. But in fact, there are disturbances in the loam, and it's those disturbances, the records that don't make sense, are the ones that are actually where the nuggets of gold are. And I'm reminded of this. There's a film that I watched when I was young. It was a very cheap English horror movie, and I think it was called something like Blood on Satan's Claw, or something like this. And Bernadette's going, where is he going? He's finally lost it. And the opening shot is literally this field, and this farmer is going up and down with a plow, and he's gradually approaching the camera. And then the camera drops down into the edge of the field, and sticking up out of the dirt, there's this kind of claw of something or other. And eventually the farmer finds it, and the story kicks off. But that's the kind of thing, it's you don't get the nugget of gold immediately, you get the claw. And then once you've kind of worked through all of the difficult stuff, the stuff that nobody wanted to talk about, the stuff that they wanted to remain buried forever. And when you're able to put that together into a complete and human, or complete enough and human story, that's when you get the gold.
And that's what people should take with them, that when they look.
Yeah. Look, and you will find. I say I've found this repeatedly, that if you go in there with not just an open mind, but an open heart, and say you have no idea what you're going to find. But the reality is, if you look back across families, most families went through similar things, And it could be coming from a completely different story, like Bernadette's story is of immigration from the Irish famine. Say my family, let's say this immigration to New Zealand happened in 1925, and then in my time we ended up immigrating to New Zealand in 1973, and it's taken another 50 years on top of that to actually uncover the drivers of why the thing happened in the first place. And this is where you have a narrative. You just say, oh, they decided to go out to New Zealand. Yeah, okay, it's economic migration, looking for a new life, all of that. Actually, their name had been cancelled in South London. It's interesting. The two daughters stayed because they were married. Their names had changed, and the two sons left.
Michael, I'm gonna let you do the wrap up because these guys are going to keep going. So I just want you can talk, keep going, but I'm going to let you.
Yeah, so I'm going to wrap up on that. And this is the kind of closure that you find through trauma-informed genealogy. You end up with a story that, even though it may have some holes in it, it may have some unanswered questions. Like, for instance, I don't know whether my great-grandfather's second marriage was genuine or not. And ultimately, it actually doesn't matter. I mean, what I have is enough of a story of people trying to create better lives for themselves, better lives for their children, and some succeeded, and there were times that some people didn't. And when they didn't, then there was a mess that's come down, and it's gradually being cleaned up, and this is part of the cleanup. And it's very humbling work. It's very satisfying work, and it may be work that nobody else understands. There may not be anyone in your family who understands why you're doing it, and yet, to me, it's absolutely central to my identity is actually knowing where my family has come from through all the good and the bad and the ugly and the whatever. And so on that note, we're going to wrap up for this week, and we should be back next week with the three of us, and we look forward to seeing you then.